Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
What if the emotions we've been taught to suppress are actually the keys to our deepest wisdom? Today, we delve into this provocative idea with Karla McLaren, an award-winning author and researcher whose empathic approach to emotions revalues even the most negative emotions and opens startling new pathways into self-awareness, effective communication, and healthy empathy. Her acclaimed book, The Language of Emotions: What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You, challenges us to embrace our full emotional spectrum. Karla is also the developer of the Empathy Academy learning site, where you can learn robust emotional skills and healthy empathy in a welcoming online community. In this conversation, Karla shares how honoring our emotions can lead to profound personal transformation. Karla, welcome to the Superhumanized podcast. Wonderful to connect with you today.
Thank you so much, Ariane. It's great to be here.
I've very much been looking forward to this conversation. Your calling, your field of expertise is a field that I have great interest in. And it is, I think, one of the superpowers of being human. And of course, we need to learn how to wield it. And that's our emotions. You have developed a grand unified theory of emotions, and which actually quite departs from more traditional psychological frameworks that often also they dichotomize emotions into positive, quote, and negative. And I find this so fascinating and also helpful. And you've really revolutionized how we can and should approach our emotional status and placing each emotion as actually integral to our cognitive processes, to our human beingness. For our audience, Karla, could you elaborate more on your grand unified theory of emotions, please?
Like most of us, I grew up thinking of emotions as a problem.
Yeah.
And that there were positive ones and negative ones, and you always want the positive ones and you never want the negative ones. And I had a lot of early childhood trauma, which in many cases will bring very intense emotions forward for the person as they go through their life. And that was certainly true for me. And so this emotions are problems idea I was right on that one. I was like, I agree, they're terrible. But over the years, dealing with my emotions, I'm realizing that this one comes up when I need this skill, and this one comes up when I need to remember this, and this one comes. I started seeing that the emotions were doing something intelligent, even though it looked like chaos, right? And so that was how I started. I was swimming in a deep ocean of emotions all the time. So for me, understanding them was a life-saving process. That I wasn't going to be able to just ignore them. That was not going to happen. And so starting at a very young age, I began to categorize and articulate and make a space for emotions within a structure of what was going on with me. And I think one of the reasons that psychology has such a hard time with emotions is that they focus on the individual. And what I was trying to do was, I didn't know it at the time, it was sociological and anthropological. So I would say, okay, category anger. When I see anger in a horse, in a cat, in my mom, in the neighbor, in myself, what happened first? And then what happens when the anger arises, right? So I was looking at it much more systematically than anger is bad and you should stop. You should stop feeling anger right now. And so that was the beginning of my understanding of emotions. And then I was able to develop a process of understanding all 17 emotions and creating ways to engage with the emotions so that you are helping it do what it came to do. For instance, with anger, whatever happens before category anger comes up is usually the breaking of a boundary, breaking of a rule. There's rudeness, there's stepping across what was agreed on. And so then the anger comes up. The next thing is, what is the person's skill set with anger? A lot of people isn't very good. They either just throw it out and then break the boundaries of the other person, and then we're in just an anger spin out, or they don't do anything. And then the boundary is broken. And so, in both cases, the way that we learn to work with emotions, which is repressing them so that they can't do their work, or throwing them so that we're out of control and so is the emotion, it helps underscore that idea that emotions are problems. And so a lot of people have nothing, there's no middle path between pressing the heck out of an emotion or throwing it at someone. There's no center space where you say, anger's here to set boundaries. How can I set boundary in ethical ways so that I don't break the boundaries of another person and so that I don't break my own? So it's like this very middle path of knowing what the emotion does, knowing what it came to help you do, and helping it do that. And then, okay, so that you and your emotions are not constantly fighting with each other. And when an emotion comes up, you don't lose your composure.
Carla, and I think this is so important. So many of us have grown up with, you actually said a particular sentence, don't be angry, right? Get sent to your room, or don't cry, don't be sad, don't be angry, you better behave, come back when you're more pleasant. So we learn that love and support is taken away from us when we very naturally have emotions arise because something happened prior. I know in retrospective now as an adult, looking at my own childhood, how often my boundaries were crossed and I was just supposed to accept it.
Yeah.
And this was the way it was done. I was wrong. My emotion was wrong. So I learned to suppress. And I learned to also dissociate from emotions because they made me bad, quote, right? And it took me a long time to not only let emotions, let's say anger, I think back as a child and also a young woman where my boundaries were crossed many times because that's what I learned. You allow others to cross your boundaries because that's how you gain acceptance, that's how you survive. And then actually to get to the point where they not only you let them arise, but you work with them in a constructive way because it's very natural, especially if you've suppressed anger for a very long time. It just at some point comes out and all these years or decades of stored anger, right, may just erupt at one particular second. I thank you for explaining, for example, anger and what precedes it and what's important to distinguish in very practical terms. How can individuals begin to decode the messages behind emotions? We've talked about anger, emotions that have traditionally been seen as disruptive or non-acceptable. Jealousy is another one, or sadness.
Yeah. 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 So what I did was with each of the emotions is that when category jealousy occurs, what is happening? And then what happens after the jealousy? Whatever people do with their jealousy, what happens then? And it's always about insecurity in a love relationship. And then when the jealousy comes forward, your skills with jealousy take the lead, right? So if you don't have skills with jealousy, you can repress the life out of it. And then whatever problem or betrayal happened is going to happen again because there's no one there. You didn't speak up, right? Or if you throw your jealousy and make the, without checking anything, make the person feel terrible about themselves. Maybe they did something, maybe they didn't, but throwing your jealousy at them is not going to help. It's shocking for the person and it can throw them into a defensive position and you're not going to see who they are. You're going to see how they've learned to fight. You're going to see their fighting behaviors, however that is. Understanding that jealousy has a very specific and very, very important thing to say to you because your mate retention abilities, the health of your relationship is crucial to your social survival, right? And if your mate is moving off into other relationships, if monogamy is an agreement that you had, that is dangerous. And that emotion needs you to know that. A lot of people is like, God, I'm so jealous. I just have to get rid of this jealousy. I'm like, don't do that. Learn to work with it and learn to speak to it. And I have questions for each of the emotions that you can ask to move away from all the terrible training we've had about emotions. All of us have every day we hear something terrible about emotions, right? To ask the question of jealousy. Let me look. I have a guide that has all of the questions. Um, Jealousy is, what kinds of intimacy do I desire and want to offer? And what betrayals must be recognized and healed,
Mhm.
right? And that keys you into what jealousy is there to do. And it gives you some ideas of what to do, especially if you tend to have no skills with that emotion, or that emotion comes up so powerfully that you lose yourself behind the intensity that has arisen. And so it's just sometimes they'd be like, okay, what's the brain anxiety? I forget. And to go to this. So it's like a cheat sheet for emotion, um, but also to help you connect with your emotions intimately so that you and your emotions are moving through life as allies and as friends. So that when I'm just walking along and tra la la, and all of a sudden I feel some anxiety, I wouldn't want to breathe in joy and breathe out anxiety or whatever, because anxiety is like, this is not a joy moment, friend. We have some things to do. But most of them, us have been taught that if there's a powerful emotion, you just want to get rid of it.
Yes.
You want to get back to happiness.
Absolutely, Carla. And when we talk about jealousy, for example, we see the absolutely twisted and perverted and actually socially, in some places in the world, sanctioned outcomes of the most violent form of jealousy, where you have so-called, quote, honor, unquote,
Yeah.
killings, or people getting subjugated and hurt mentally, spiritually, and physically, often put to death for living out their own desires. Most of the time, it's women who this perverted form of jealousy gets thrown at. I agree with you. It's so important that we actually learn how to deal with it. There are communities who, let's say, not people who identify as, let's say, polyamorous, or people who decide they want to be in open relationships, everything that falls under this umbrella term of consensual non-monogamy, who very, very much with intention go and embrace these emotions of jealousy and then learn how to deal with it. Does it mean you're always going to be free of it and everything is sunshine and rainbows and unicorns? No. But you have a framework that's much different from what you were given, or rather not given, growing up. And you also have this reframing of emotions that we talked about anger, you just mentioned anxiety, this reframing of them as healing forces rather than problems to be solved. That also brings to mind for me the ideas of Carl Gustav Jung, who believed that the integration of what he called the shadow is actually crucial for a personal development. And you've taken this much further with these actionable steps for individuals to engage with these emotions in a productive way. So, from all of these emotions that have been labeled as quote negative, what do you think is the most misunderstood emotion in your framework? And what's the best way for people to start the process to be working with it instead of against it?
It is so hard to find which one is the most misunderstood or the most hated, because it changes every day. So I would say shame is almost completely misunderstood and hated. Hatred, hated. Suicidal urge and situational depression, hated. Jealousy and envy. Envy is one of the 7 deadly sins in the Catholic tradition, right? A human emotion. Now, we know that they're talking about what people do when they have no envy skills, right? They're talking about people feeling envy and then just exploding with their lack of awareness. But also, anxiety is almost completely misunderstood. Um, it's like people don't even know what anxiety is. They don't even know what it does. They confuse it with panic. So, yeah, there are so many emotions that do such tremendously important things. So choose one. Choose one of those terrible ones.
Yeah, oh gosh. One that I find interesting from a cultural perspective, and I'll share with you why, is envy. So I'm German born. I did not grow up in Germany. I grew up in West Africa, India, Spain, United States, Germany. My father worked for the diplomatic service, so I was moving every 3 to 4 years, first 4 weeks of my life I spent in Germany, then a few years in between. I maybe spent a fourth of my life on and off in Germany. That being said, Germany, with regard to envy, and I think it's changing a little bit with younger generations, but definitely still my generation and the older generations. So it was culturally ingrained. So let's say somebody, I'm just going to pick the example because it's easy to imagine, somebody drives a really nice car. In Berlin to this day, if you drive a nice car, and I'm talking upper middle class nice, I'm not talking Ferrari nice, right? Even just upper middle class nice car, you better have a garage for it. Because if you park it on the street, even in one of the nicer neighborhoods, the risk that it may get scratched by someone who's envious is still relatively high. So I also know that in countries like Ukraine, I have friends from Ukraine, they differentiate between what they call black envy and white envy. So the black envy is more what we have this undercurrent in Germany, where it's, okay, you have a nice car, F you, F your nice car, and I'm going to damage it. I'm going to ruin it and take it from you. The white envy is more, oh, wow, you have a nice car. I would also like a nice car. Okay. Hey, can I talk to you? Can you share with me how you actually obtained this nice car? Maybe there's something I can learn and apply to my own life. I find this really interesting. In Germany, we even have words for, let's say somebody drives a nice car. We have a particular word, Angeberauto, show-off car. It's actually a German word, and it implies this envy that is just, an undercurrent. Let's talk about envy.
Yeah. I love that white envy and black envy, because the envy where you're going to go and you're going to deface someone else's property to tell them that they're not okay, that what they're doing is not okay with you, and you don't deserve to have it. I think that comes from such a sense of self feeling that I don't deserve to have it. It's such a projection. It looks cool, but it's such a sign of personal diminishment to want to take or damage what other people have, right? And what they call the white envy would be more understanding the heart of envy, which is it wants things to be fair and equitable, but it also tries to tell you what you desire. And so if you don't have a good connection to your envy, yeah, it would think that there's not enough in this world. It would think that if you're having that Mercedes or Audi, because Mercedes is a little bit upper class, right? So Audi's like more middle class, right? If you're having that Audi, you are stealing that Audi from me, right? There's not enough in the world. And so I've got to somehow deface your property. That would be moving against what envy does. I call it interactional radar. And envy and jealousy are sibling emotions. I call them together the sociological emotions, because what they do is they keep an eye on where you are in the social structure. It's very important for primates, and especially for social animals like us, that we need to know where we are in the social structure. And the questions for envy are, what resources and security do I desire for myself and others? And what inequalities must be made right? So envy is always going to be looking at inequalities, right? It's always going to be looking at fairness and access to resources. And some of our greatest voices for social justice are people who are working well with their envy. They're saying, I should not have this much access to medical care and you have zero, right? And you have no access to medical care. And if you do get medical care, you're going to pay top dollar and I'm going to pay $20 to go visit. Why is this? Why is this unfairness? It's very unhealthy. That envy work with a person who's not just focusing on themselves and that damn person with the car, but actually saying, what does everybody need? So people with what is called black envy need to start asking the question, what do I desire for myself and others? Because having people who don't have enough in your social structure is endangering to the whole structure. It's a sign of structural decay. And yeah, so they're noticing it, but they're blaming the people who somehow got to the middle class. And as we know, as middle class or upper class people, it's not just all dancing and ponies here. Right? If you own a house, it is not just dancing and ponies. It is a lot of work and holding things up so that you can be a member of your social class. Yeah.
Right. Yes, thank you for explaining that. And yes, I concur. Envy, if you extend it to the entire community where you live in, can be something so valuable if you use it and channel it in the correct way. Another emotion, if we can dive into that, was actually the second emotion I was battling, envy or anxiety. Envy or anxiety. Anxiety is something that I'm intimately acquainted with. If you want to follow the 10,000 hours saying, I'm somewhat of an expert in it. I feel quite well. I've not only learned how to manage it, managing it, of course, means managing it as like symptoms. I've actually waited a lot. So the anxiety levels I used to have, which were sky high, and knowing also where they came from, but it's one thing to know, it's another thing to integrate, are now quite low. And you're actually talking about in embracing anxiety, you redefine anxiety as a very valuable and even a necessary emotion. And that's a view, if you want to look at more traditional therapeutic models, there's a stark contrast there because these therapeutic models in most cases aim to eliminate anxiety. I personally never took any prescription medications for when I suffered anxiety and panic attacks. That was my choice. I don't want to diminish anybody's choice. So here, medications have their time and place, but I do connect more with something like also Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, where he posits that suffering can serve as a pathway towards meaning. And your work seems to suggest that anxiety too can guide us towards a better future if we know how to listen to it. What are some first steps that you could suggest for somebody who's currently dealing with anxiety? And as you mentioned before, this is not pleasant, this is not joyful. What are some first steps that someone could take to shift their relationship with anxiety from fear and avoidance? I personally am very well acquainted with numbing, avoiding the anxiety. So how can that be shifted to a relationship of collaboration?
Understanding first that your emotions come up for important reasons, and they're not a sign that something's wrong with you, but that there's something wrong. And anxiety specifically, when I wrote Embracing Anxiety, I went to everybody I knew and I said, explain anxiety to me. Tell me what anxiety is. And to a person, they were explaining panic and anxiety do work together, but for some people, they're so close, you cannot get them apart. You don't even know that there's two emotions here. And anxiety brings the gifts of focus and motivation and completion. So anxiety's job is to make sure that you meet your deadlines and you finish your tasks and know enough about the future to smooth your path, right? So anxiety is a very forward-leaning emotion. It's got a lot of energy. The problem with a forward-leaning emotion is it can be ungrounded because you don't live in the future. You can only think about it. So anxiety is going to fill you with a lot of energy and tilt you forward a little bit as you think about everything that you're doing and everything that needs to be done. If your life is too busy, as most of our lives are, anxiety is going to be a constant companion for you. Task, deadline, task, that. And working with time management, working with different ways to make sure that you get enough done, but you're not like a joyless taskmaster of yourself is the way to work with anxiety. But panic is usually there, and we've actually created a word, pangxiety, which is panic plus anxiety. The way to know that panic is there is that if there's any sense of dread or danger,
Mhm.
because panic is the emotion that saves your life, right? It will come with fight, flee, freeze, and flock to safety. And so one of the first things for people whose panic and anxiety are together is to ask the panic question first, which is, am I in literal danger of losing my life? That's panic's job. It's a fast, quick, extremely powerful emotion. And panic can say, no, nothing will. But In the future, if you don't get these jobs done, if you don't hit your deadlines, you may lose your job, right? Which means losing your stability, which means losing your financial, right? Which means maybe you're losing your house, right? So panic can see out in the future too when panic and anxiety are together. So I think that's one of the first things is help panic know, okay, I hear what you're saying and it's not helping me right now. Can we get with anxiety and see what anxiety can do? And so there's a lot of things with anxiety. Making a list, I know it sounds silly, but list making, physically making a list and pouring it down your fingers into the paper helps anxiety see that you know what's happening and that you've moved stuff out of your short term memory. And so now you've got a plan, and anxiety can go, okay, you're on this. I don't have to hold everything. So it's really you're downloading onto the paper so that your brain has time. And then generally panic will go, okay, she's got this. She's got this, and we are not going to lose our job next week. I've been asking myself, why are panic and anxiety like this? Why? What in the heck is going on? And the answer after 5 years of asking the question is capitalism.
Mhm.
In capitalism, we are not worthy of being alive because we're alive. We have to prove ourselves. We have to have money. We have to keep going and earning and going and da, 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 da. So there's no chance to settle.
Mm.
I'm just like to be an artist, and I don't want to pay my rent. I don't want to be a part of that. Capitalism treats us as earning agents of earning, right? And we see, especially here in the United States, that people who are not agents of earning are not valued in any way. Unsheltered folks, in many cases children, and in many cases elders, we don't value them. We say we do. I believe the children are the future. Then why don't we have universal health care? And let's all respect the elders. And I thought, what would that look like? Because they're mostly being put into homes and treated as, if you look at images of elders in movies and TV, they're always amazingly ignorant people and they're naive. If you look at thinking of Betty White, who's this wonderful, brilliant woman, and at the end of her career, she was just being this bawdy, weirdly sexual lady who's always making jokes, and that was her gig. And I thought, she's an amazing person. When did she become a joke? When did her presence become a joke? And it was like, after about 60 was when that happened. Yeah. So I think panic knows that without money, we are in danger.
Mm,
Right.
those are really interesting points, Carla. And also what you said about, yes, the elderly in our culture, they're being put into homes, which I think is also closely tied to this relatively new development of the nuclear family. If you want to look at it through a very conservative tinged lens, that would be, say, 1950s. Mommy, daddy, 2.5 kids, one dog, white picket fence, right? But that's a relatively new invention. Even if you take it into our modern times where there's different, you may have two mommies, two daddies, one mommy, one dad, whatever.
Yeah.
But if we look much further into our past, the community used to raise the children. Literally took a village slash a tribe to raise the children and to also take care of the elderly who had their place in this community, who were revered, whose wisdom was sought out, who were listened to. Very different nowadays. And tying this to capitalism and, of course, to the post and industrial world, or starting with the industrial revolution, actually, it's a really good point, Carla. Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in San Francisco when my son was little, and I managed an apartment building because that's what we could do. And there was a wonderful Thai family, and they had babies to elders living in the same apartment. I didn't care, and they took care of my son. And it was a whole different world seeing that many generations living together. And I thought, where's my grandma? Where's my grandfather? We're so separated from family here, and it's not good.
Mhm.
It's not healthy.
Yes, I agree.
Mm.
And to talk a little bit more about anxiety, thank you for illuminating the part about anxiety and panic and how they're tied together and how it's also important to differentiate those in a sense. I think with regard to anxiety, which most of the time can feel just really chaotic and just like, woo, it's just the swirling chaos around you, inside you. At least
Yeah.
that's my personal experience. How can one help people distinguish between the productive anxiety that motivates us, that focuses us, and the overwhelming anxiety that feels just paralyzing?
I think one thing that really helped me is there's a book by Mary Lamia, and she's the person who I really learned about anxiety from, and it's called What Motivates Getting Things Done. And she talks about the two ways that we work with anxiety. One is being a do it aheader or a person who is task oriented. The other is a person who meets deadlines, who's focused on deadlines. So we've got task orientation and deadline orientation. Deadline orientation is also called procrastination.
Yeah.
And there is no good definition of procrastination that I could find, but the word itself means defer until tomorrow.
Mhm.
And that is such an important thing if you're a task person. As a task person, and I am, your anxiety is a constant kind of bump. So here's the timeline, here's your anxiety, go task, right? You can lose yourself when you go into another room and you see something that needs to get done and you're like, "Yes," and then you forget the other thing, right? You're just like an automaton of anxiety. And so it's a constant kind of a low-level anxiety as long as you can get your tasks done. If
Mhm.
too many tasks gets put on you, then your anxiety may start bouncing and jumping because now you cannot get the things done, and your anxiety would go very high then, and probably panic would come in and say, "Is there anything I can do? Right? Is there any help you need here to save this situation?" Right? So there we go. When there's too many tasks, a task person will have a heightened anxiety that may feel very uncomfortable, and panic may come in to help. Thanks, panic. Procrastinator, here's the timeline. They see the deadline, it's out a week or a month or whatever. And what they do is they rest underneath the timeline, they rest and they go to the unconscious or the subconscious. And right before the deadline comes, they got a of anxiety, just that it shoots up to the air and they might get the thing done in a day or 2 days where they're not sleeping. Right. And people who have that kind of deadline focus are used to having basically no anxiety or not that they're any aware of at all. Right. And then a giant push toward the end. Now
Mhm.
that's normal for them. And a lot of people who are task people would say, okay, first of all, they're lazy right here because they're not doing their tasks like I do. And then when they get to the end and they deal with this massive rocket of anxiety, we would say, oh, they're lucky. Procrastinators live in the shadow.
Mm.
Nobody welcomes them or witnesses them. And the normal way that their anxiety works. And then panic may come in too, saying, you've only got a day. Panic and anxiety, we're like, let's get it on done. That is going to feel like an anxiety disorder when it's just that you are a natural procrastinator who knows what belongs in the future. You know,
Mm.
and you can relax up to it, right? But I love that. I love that there's two ways to it. And I do a lot of consultations with people, and they come to me with this overall shame. And they have a shame about this and shame about that. I'm like, hold on, what's shame doing? And and then I'll ask them about how they like to get things done, and they're almost always procrastinators who've never been witnessed. They've never been welcomed into this world. It's a
Mm.
perfectly good way to work.
What about someone like myself? I'm a procrastinator still. I also have lists and tasks. That's more for the daily stuff. But let's say there's a big something I need to prepare or get done. I tend to procrastinate. I still have lingering anxiety in the time period that builds up towards it. So not just a day off or 2 days before. It can be period of 3 weeks. And I still won't get on the whatever needs to get done until maybe 2 days or 1 day before, depending on the magnitude of it. But in the 3 weeks that build up, every day I'll still be like, So
Yeah. I mean, it would be bizarre if, as a procrastinator, you had ever been seen for the skills that you have. And as a task person, I've learned to procrastinate. When I wrote the book, I learned to procrastinate. I will always speak it with an accent. I'll never be totally fluent. But what I found is if you're up here tasking tasks, there's no creativity because creativity is in this area where you're down below consciousness, right? Which is where procrastinators live. And then they come at the end and they put together something, and as a task person, I'm like, was that magic? Or are you just lucky? You're lazy and you're lucky. I've learned that to write well, I have to procrastinate
yes.
because otherwise you're writing a technical manual. It's a task, boring, blah, blah, blah. To know where it belongs, if you're doing any kind of art, you need to procrastinate. And
Mm,
it's going to be hard because every person in the world will tell you that you need to do tasks. You need to break it down into little things and do your time management. And everything is for task
mm.
oriented people. Everything.
Yes, Carlin. I'm so happy on a personal level you're just saying this because I'm actually preparing. I've written and published 3 books in the past, fiction, nonfiction. I'm preparing to write my next fiction book. So the voice of the culture escape is telling me, you need to be doing this week, this next week, where my inner voice is saying, no, enjoy, read all types of books that go into the type of genre that you're attracted to writing and just enjoy and just let it simmer, right?
Yeah.
Which is exactly the space I need to be. So I need to thank, but also say thanks and no thank you and no thanks. And you can go take a vacation now. This bullying voice of you need to do, because
Yeah.
that actually kills creativity. You're right.
Yeah. My publisher, I've been with them for a long time, but now they suddenly realize that they need to tell people how to write. So they sent me this thing like, here's a helpful thing about how to write. And I looked at it and it was entirely task focused. It was there was not a single welcome to procrastination. And I was like, can you guys read Embracing Anxiety and understand that people are writing books? These should be creative. They should have space. They should have things bubbling up from the unconscious that don't make sense until next Tuesday. When you finally get it, right? You need procrastination. And I love it's belonging to tomorrow and something like delaying to the next day. But procrastinators know what belongs to tomorrow. And as a massive task person, I do not. I look at something on the desk, I go start tasking it, and then I realize, oh, I was supposed to be doing this, right? Tasks, I get it on what I call the anxiety train. It's a task NATO. Right? And now I'm not driving the train, I'm in the back, I'm shoveling the coal in, and I've lost my entire understanding of what belongs to tomorrow.
Yes, and so many of us may have also absorbed that via our caretakers. And I'm thinking, for example, of my mother, and bless her, she has done everything for my brother and I, and all the things we were able to enjoy and learn and extracurricular activities. And when you manage a family and a household, you have tons of tasks lining up, right? There's just so much stuff you need to get done. That being said, I remember I observed as a girl, the tons of lists, to-do list for this, to-do list for that needs to get done, that needs to get done, that needs to get done. And the constant stress, of course, accompanying managing all these tasks, needing to get all of this done. So I'm pretty sure I absorbed some of that as well. And what has really helped me, and that's also a big pillar of your work, Carla, that is having empathy not only for others, but also for myself. And what really resonated inside of me with what you're saying, Carla, is the way you've described empathy. It's not just an innate quality, but rather it's a skill that can be cultivated. And that actually also aligns with the newest neuroscience that suggests that empathy is malleable, even in adults. They've done some great research at the Max Planck Institute that demonstrates how empathy training can actually increase altruistic behaviors. And so that shifts empathy from a moral virtue to actually an an actionable competence, which is pretty revolutionary in our understanding of emotional intelligence. So with in your realm of expertise and your many years of researching and your body of work surrounding this, Karla, how do you see empathy training evolving, whether it's in, say, self-growth, personal space, or also in professional environments, where it's actually also an increasingly in-demand leader skill?
Yeah. Yeah. I I feel 2 ways. I feel 2 ways. One, I think it's really good to give people the idea that empathy is a skill that you can develop. And I have seen people, especially doctors, who, when they do what they do, I said, "Oh, you've," to myself, "Oh, you've had empathy training," because it's formulaic. So they're doing it because they learned how to do it. So I think you can do the training in such a way that you say, and empathy looks like this. When a person says this, you do that. And what I found is that empathy, there's no roadmap, right? It's you and the person interacting. And so I'm looking at empathy. Certainly, we know that empathy is not a trait, although you can have higher trait empathy and lower trait empathy. But I see it as an interaction that happens in every moment so that I can be having empathy 100 with you and empathy 10.5 with you at the same moment in the same room, in the same brain. And understanding how relational empathy is, how relational an interaction, that it's your willingness to interact, right? Rather than saying the right thing or doing empathic listening or whatever that is. That's what it is. Yeah. Don't I know what it is. But I think one of the most amazing parts of empathy, and I've separated into 6 aspects so that people can like key into which aspect might be low or high for them, is reading good fiction. Reading good fiction will increase your empathy, and so will watching good drama. Because you have to put yourself, that's the point of reading, is you're putting yourself into the body of the protagonist, and you're feeling what they feel, right? And so having all that empathic exercises with drama and fiction. Then the question is, what is the empathic quality of your drama and your fiction? Right? There's a lot of people watching a lot of really violent stuff. And I'm wondering what it does. So people watching true crime now, that's a new thing. They're watching a lot of stuff about multiple murders. I'm like, I wonder what that's doing. I
Yeah.
wonder how that's doing for your empathy.
Yeah, I read something interesting a little while ago about how, let's say, violent movies, or now we're in October, Halloween is coming up, and lots of horror movies on
Yeah.
all the streaming platforms and movie theaters. So for some people, watching a horror movie, at the thrills, the ups and downs, and the scares, at the end of it, their nervous system is actually relaxed. It got
Yeah.
somehow more of an outlet. Other people, I count towards those, the end of a movie like that, our nervous system is not relaxed. I will go to bed with all the lights on. I will have to look multiple times in every corner, under every bed in the house, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder if there is a difference, first of all, the consuming of this violence, where some people, it may actually put them into a more balanced state. A lot of people, it'll put them out of balance. But also, I agree with you. I think there's been such a rise in violence and how you can consume it. If you compare it to decades ago, whether you watch it on TV, you stream it, whether it's in gaming, and it is very explicit. I would guess, as a layperson, that a natural reaction to that, especially in combination with the thrills you get and the rewards and the dopamine release, because your character succeeds and another rises to another level, gets better weapons, whatnot, that a natural reaction may be to just, you get completely desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Similar to when you, let's say you're a doctor and you actually need to function in your field. If you empathize too much, if you get too emotionally involved, you may not be able to function at your highest level of what's asked in the moment, in that case, being a doctor.
Yeah.
Uh, so I really wonder what the effects are, especially on younger people. And knowing now, I think it's your brain is not fully developed until the age of, is it 21 or 25? So I wonder what all this imprinting does.
Yeah. I see it in comment threads all over the internet where people are just, they're shitty to each other just to be shitty. Just, there's no meaning to it except to be unkind and slappy and punishing. Yeah, and so that shows a lack of empathy for the people that you're dealing with, but it also maybe like a desensitization to the feelings and the bodies and the wholeness of others, that everybody could be a target for you. Yeah.
It's for
Yeah.
sure, and especially talking about social media and in this rise of this digital communication, it seems to have created a paradox. On the one side, we're more connected than ever, looking at social media forums and how we can comment, partake in each other's lives. But what you just said, and also what studies show, is that empathy is declining, especially among the younger generations. If you, I think there's a work by Sherry Turkle, Alone Together, that actually speaks to this very issue. And I personally think that that approaches to empathy, such as yours, are more necessary than ever. And this digital age has definitely impacted our ability to develop empathy, especially looking at how so much of our communication it's nonverbal, right? We speak through images, emojis, it's fragmented. Do you think that digital tools, ironically, could also be used to cultivate empathy? And if so, how?
I'm thinking of, I really was fascinated by what is called in the research emotional dysregulation online,
Hmm.
right? And people think it's because people aren't working under their own names. It turns out that's not true. And it's mostly because they're alone. And they did a really interesting study where people were able to go on emotionally enraging or engaging online platforms while they were in presence of others or when they were alone. And if there was another person near them or behind them, they were still dysregulated. But if they were in the presence of the face of a person and it was a possible that the person could look at them, then they regulated themselves. And we know as social animals, we do regulate each other. So I think people alone, without anybody around them or without that eye contact, for some people, they can't regulate. Now, those of us who write all day long and are alone all day long, we can regulate. We're okay. But did we learn to do that as adults? We learned to do that. Did we have our empathy on board before we went online? I think possibly, although I've seen a lot of people my age who are totally dysregulated on the internet, so maybe not. Right? And I've seen a lot of people who are younger who can regulate themselves. But
Yeah.
one of the things that they did, and this is another study, is the coffee service at your work where you pay 25 cents for your coffee or whatever it is. And a lot of people went out with the coffee and they didn't give the 25 cents. So they put a picture of a human face with eyes, and all of a sudden people are paying their 25 cents. So there's something about human eyes that gets people to regulate and be more socially appropriate and kind and empathic and understanding. So I'm saying we put eyes all over the internet. Like Facebook just has eyes, and Reddit has eyes, and I think people would catch on because I just said it out loud. But
Yeah,
some
tongue
people
tongue in
don't.
cheek tongue in cheek, that goes along with Larry Ellison has recently said that, but it's a different topic, but where he's talking about how everything will basically be surveilled, the eyes in the sky, the cameras, and all of the citizens will be on their best behavior because everything is going to be watched at all times.
But if you don't know it, then you cannot get your
That's
regulation back.
true. Very true. Yes. Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, I
Um,
think just thinking about just they're alone without appropriate empathy on board. Their
mhm.
empathy is not on board because there's nobody to help regulate them. Yeah.
Yes. And emotional regulation is so important. You actually have developed an extraordinary framework, the dynamic emotional integration, you call it. It's, if I understood it correctly, it's a blend of psychological and emotional literacy tools that also echo what I know from mindfulness or somatic therapies. A,
Mhm.
the way DEI teaches people to approach each emotion as an ally, which we talked about before, is really profound. I'd like to know from you a couple of things. So, how does your framework distinguish itself from other emotional regulation models, let's say mindfulness or somatic therapies? And how do you see these disciplines perhaps interacting?
I think for me, the mindfulness that I learned when I was younger, so this would be 40, 45 years ago, was calm your body and get yourself into a good headspace. And then as the emotions, imagine them going by. So it was very detached from emotion and you were settling yourself first. And I began to say, what's going by in that river? Because I want to capture those emotions. So I think it's really good to get yourself in a stable, grounded, focused place and then be available to the emotions. And that I think can only happen if you see your emotions as allies and you know what they're supposed to be doing. Especially if it's anxiety and panic together and they're on a train, you need to have a stability and a groundedness in the way that you would if you were going to go into martial arts, right? You don't just start kicking, you're going to fall. You have to get yourself prepared so that when anxiety and panic need to go, you won't be thrown. You'll be like, okay, let's do it. And you'll have the stability and the grounding you need to do that. And I think all of these things can come together, but if you don't know what the emotions are doing, it's very easy to pathologize them and want to get back to a calm place, want to get back to happiness, want to get back to stability. And I'm saying let's do stability and the emotions.
Mhm.
And let's get ourselves ready for the rough and tumble of this world without being run over by a train of anxiety or being stuck in the coal shoveling place.
Oh gosh, yes, and
It's
very familiar places, but there's such phenomenal tools and teachings, such as you offer, Carla. I'm just so grateful for everything you put forth into this world.
Thank you.
And I'd like to know from you, is there anything you would like to direct the attention of our audience towards? Any new offerings? Anything you would want to share with the audience?
Yes, in November, I am teaching a course, an online course at Bioneers about how to work with emotions and understand the emotional ecosystem. And in December, on the 10th, my newest book, which is the Language of Emotions workbook, is coming out. And that one is a small, easy to read book, and it's got activities to do with each of your emotions so you can, and practices, so that you can become really comfortable with your emotions. And if you're feeling something like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling rage, quickly go to the anger and see what to do. So it's really like an owner's manual for your emotions that will help you quickly stabilize yourself so that you can work with the emotion.
Outstanding, Carla. I will definitely get it as soon as it comes out. And I have a feeling a lot of people who are on my Christmas list will get it this year as well. That's a wonderful thing to have at your side to actually help. And for people who'd like to learn more about you, maybe also connect with you, how can they do so?
You can come to my site, karlamclaren.com. We've also got an online community at empathyacademy.org and courses that you can take there to play with your emotions and your empathy.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing everything of your vast knowledge base, out of your vast knowledge base today. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much.